All right, well, welcome again. Those of you just joining us online, glad that you are here this morning. Today we're going to jump back into our series. Last week we celebrated Easter, but we're going to jump back into our series that we're just calling Refocus, where we're just working our way through some of the teaching and things we need to work our way through in order to kind of reestablish ourselves as a fully accredited church within the Christian and Missionary Alliance. And I just want to say I see those Alliance shirts out there, and I did not get the memo. There's two shirts that match, and I have the third matching one. But what we've said all along during this series is that the mission of our church, and really the mission of any church, has been given to us just by Jesus himself. Jesus at the end of the Gospel of Matthew, in what we call the Great Commission, of course, says that famous phrase that we're supposed to go into all the world and make disciples, right, of every tribe, nation, tongue, all that stuff. But as you know, Jesus starts this announcement, that commission, with an interesting statement where he says something about authority. And I think that's an important thing for us. He says that all authority, so in heaven and on earth, as Jesus says it, has been given to him. And then from that authority, he gives us our mission as disciples and as the church. And so in the Christian and Missionary Alliance, we actually talk about what we call constituted authority. And that's kind of a technical phrase that we use where basically what we're saying is that authority comes from Jesus himself, the great shepherd, down to our churches, and then from there we're sent out on mission. Now that has a lot of implications for how we do discipline and licensing and all that stuff, but for today we're going to focus just on the idea in broad terms of authority and power. And so while the church is unlike any other organization in that it cuts across all the things that every other kind of organization is usually built on, right? Ethnicity, politics, sports, music, preference, whatever it is. The church cuts across all those things, and that's why the church looks the way it does when it's a healthy church. We're full of different kinds of people because what draws us together is the gospel of Jesus, the blood of Christ, his resurrection, and his empowerment through his Spirit. But what we also see is that in the New Testament, as the church grows from a tiny little Jewish sect into what it has become over the last couple thousand years, we see that as it does that, what ends up being needed is what always ends up being needed when even just a family grows bigger, and that's just leadership. And so that leadership is something that just is a necessary thing. Even in the garden, God gives authority and leadership to Adam and Eve. He tells them to basically take what I've created and organize it and make it better. Name the animals and all that stuff. That's constituted authority if you really want to put that name on it. And so at the same time, as the church is different than any other organization, we're similar in that we need leadership in the church. We just don't want chaos going on in the church. And in fact, a lot of the New Testament is being written to churches that have some form of chaos or lack of leadership going on. And so that's what we have as kind of our missionary handbook in the New Testament. We have the accounts of the life of Jesus, and then we have essentially letters to churches saying, hey, no, this is how it should look. And that's leadership. And so as soon as we start to talk about organization and leadership, we inherently have to start to talk about authority, right? Because who gets to make the decision? And so that for us is a pretty hot button issue, leadership, authority, and specifically when you hear the word power structures, Me Too movement was based on that. A lot of the conversations we're having about the history of racial tensions in our country are based around power. And so that's a conversation that's happening right now. And each of us in our own experience probably have stories we could tell of when authority or power was misused or mishandled, right? And so we have loads of those examples of bad leadership. We have experience personally of what it looks like when people in leadership positions have a relationship to authority that doesn't lead to the thriving of humanity around them. So right now, I'll give you an example from the world stage, so to speak. We have a horrible situation happening in Myanmar, Burma, where essentially what has happened is a military coup that has led to the deaths of dozens of people, including a lot of children. And this is an example of what happens when there is an ungodly view of authority and it gets taken kind of to its end. That's what's going on right now. But we have so many examples from our own communities, our own nation as well, right? Doesn't matter which side of the political aisle you're on, you can appointed leaders on both sides who have not done authority well. And so we have example after example, even from within our own sort of Christian world, right? I mean, most recently, the stuff with Ravi Zacharias that came out and the horrible situation that is, again, another example of misuse of authority, misuse of power. And so as a reaction to this, what we have is a view across many places and even in some of us where we've reacted to that bad use of authority by saying all authority then is inherently bad. That authority itself is the problem, and so we need to root that out. And so we're in a moment of deconstruction right now, culturally speaking. Our culture is deconstructing a lot of the way things have been. Some of that's good and some of that's not good. Some of that deconstruction is going to lead to bad things. And a lot of that has to do with the way we've seen authority and power abused and misused. And so because God has wired human beings the way he's wired us, right? We believe that God has wired us in the same way that he wired Adam and Eve before the fall to be creative and to bring order out of chaos. What we've done as human beings is respond to a perceived need that we see, but the problem is that we've responded in a way that says all authority is bad, and really that solution creates more problems than it solves. And so that solution in itself doesn't really solve the problem. And so we end up with this solution where we say we're going to push back against all authority, and all authority is bad. And if you're from the authority, then you're from the bad people, and all of that. And so we end up with this situation where we have little to no trust in leaders, right? Across the board, that's spiking right now in our sort of situation, our culture. We question everything they do. We question everything they say. And some of that's good. We should do that. We question every decision, every motive that they might have. And if you think about it, every piece of art, every piece of music, every piece of kind of any cultural expression right now is being invaded with this idea that authority is bad. We should get rid of kind of the way things have been, right? Every movie since I've been in high school is basically like a dystopian future where the government failed because they were evil, and now the new hero, independent person is doing everything. That's essentially the storyline of so many movies. And so we end up questioning any and all forms of authority. Now, what we know from the Great Commission of Jesus, though, for those of us in the church, and really the entire witness of the Bible, is that authority is not inherently bad or evil. Authority itself is not bad. Leadership itself is not inherently bad or evil. Authority itself is a good thing that has been given to us by God, and by God to Jesus, and then to us, as we see in the commission. And this is what we see in the scriptures. Jesus says, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. So then if that's the case, then there has to be a place for authority and leadership inside of Jesus' kingdom, where he's the king. And the expression of that right now is inside of the church. And so what I want to do over the next couple weeks, I always think I'm going to cover a lot more in 1 week than we actually will. So I'm learning to pull back on that and say, no, this is probably going to take 2 weeks. So over the next couple weeks, probably 3, what I want to do is walk us through some of this. So today I just want to focus on 2 places from the life of Jesus where he does some specific teaching on this topic, and then we see an embodied picture of this in a display in Jesus' life. And then over the next couple weeks, we're going to look at the kind of technical side of, as a church, as a Christian and Missionary Alliance church, who we believe is called and qualified to actually fill the leadership roles within the church. And then after that discussion, we'll revisit the conversation on membership that we had in general and talk in specifics about membership here at our church. And hopefully by then we'll even have some kind of a membership covenant that we will have kind of written down to say this is what we're all in on together. So that's kind of the written in pencil plan, as I like to say, over the next few weeks. But before we get started, I just want to share with you from my own experience of being in the church. I have never not been in a church family. I cannot think of more than a handful of Sundays where I wasn't in a church service somewhere. So that's my background. That's my story. As a kid, I grew up from, I can't remember my family ever not being in a church. So I've been in a bunch of churches in a few different states because my family moved around a lot, and for no other reason than we just like to move, I think. But I have stories from my own past in the church that create in my own heart a sense of distrust sometimes in leadership, and specifically even in church leadership, ironically, that I'm a part of now. Right? And so I've shared this with our own advisory committee, our own leadership team. But I think that when I first came as pastor a little over 3 years ago, actually 3.5 years ago, I still had some baggage that I didn't even realize I had. Like I had some church hurt baggage that I was carrying on to. Some of it I knew I had. And, like you do when you get bitter, you kind of like it for a while because it feels good to be mad. But then there was some leftover stuff that I didn't realize I still had. And so I was in a church where the leadership team was really just unhealthy. And so there was a lot of distrust. There was a lot of misuse of authority, kind of going around each other to kind of manipulate situations. And the way a lot of this manifested itself was just kind of in an inability to make good decisions, an inability to do things for the flourishing of the church. And it also manifested itself in crazy long elder meetings, like 6-hour elder meetings. The 2 elders in here, that ain't happening, right? Right? So we'd spend an entire Saturday in a room together. And so when I came here, I noticed that I would start to feel a little bit stressed out on the Monday morning that we were going to have an advisory committee meeting that night. And so I began to realize, wait a minute, this is like a weird form of like church PTSD almost. Like you carry over this stuff from your past experience. And the reason I want to share this is that I'm guessing that some of you have had an experience like that in maybe a church, maybe in the long history of this church that you've been a part of. There's some conflict you can remember where leadership didn't do its job. And part of what I want to say to you is, as I preach these messages about leadership, it doesn't mean that the elders and the deacons and whoever is the leaders in this church are going to be the perfect embodiment of these things. It means that we're trying and we're walking with Jesus, but it also, I share this with you, just to say that I know what church hurt feels like. I know what it feels like to